want the intro music.
It's kind of weird.
I'm waiting for YouTube to start playing so I can pause it.
Is there no intro music?
It takes a minute to pause. I have Twitch. There's
Here we go, here we go. Here we go, here we go.
Because I can't.
Here we go, here we go, here we go, here we go, here we go. Here we go, here we go.
Stream that up.
Here we go, here we go. Here we go, here we go, here we go, here we go, here we go. Here we
Hey,
go.
what is this called again?
Here we go.
Yeah,
Here we go, here we go, here we go, here we go.
10 seconds.
Here we go. Here we go. Here we go, here we go, here we go, here we go.
Okay, and we are live, I believe. Are we live?
I think so. Yeah, it's hard to
We're
tell.
doing it live. So this is a very special edition of Containers from the Couch today. Really excited to do this. So this is have a seat on Containers from the Couch. So we have a chime room open, and today we're just gonna chat. There's no formal topics, right? We're just here to chat, and hopefully, as you're seeing this right now, let's share the chime link.
Done.
And folks, you can just come on in, join us. If you have questions, you want to talk about anything containers related in AWS or just containers in general, jump in. Let's chat. So, I think we all know each other. Everyone knows who we are, but should we do some intros, or what do you think, Brent?
Yeah, I mean, let's go ahead and do intros. I can start. So I'm Brent Langston, and I like to talk about containers. I think they're kind of cool. I think they're kind of handy. They've solved a lot of my problems that I've had with distributing software and running distributed software. So that's been nice. Lately, I've been focusing a lot on a new AWS product called Proton. And I think, that if that's something anyone wants to talk about, to find out more about it or tell me your experience, after you tried it out, happy to have a chat about that. I don't know, Justin, you want to go next?
Sure. And I also was going to say, if the chime link's there, if you want to jump in, it's a web client. You can join the meeting. If you're not comfortable with that, go ahead and ask in chat too. We're watching chat. We can definitely discuss questions if you just want to send them there text-based without video or audio. So yeah, feel free to ask questions there as well. But yeah, we're all on the same team here at AWS. I've used containers for quite a while now in a couple different environments, which is always fun to see how it's used in sort of unique ways. But I've been involved with Kubernetes for quite a long time. I was with Docker, not with Docker, but using Docker early on. It was very rough in the early days, but also very amazing. Like Brent said, to package software, and instead of writing spec files for RPMs, it was easier sometimes just to write a Docker file. So that was nice. And then otherwise, yeah, I used ECS for a very long time at Disney Streaming, which, by the way, if you missed the reInvent talk, Disney Plus had a couple different talks, and one of them was with an old coworker of mine, Zach, about how they were doing deployments with ECS. So I was, using containers there as well. So I like talking about it and helping people be successful.
Nice. Mr. Butler?
That's me. So I'm Jesse Butler. I'm in the team too. And I should mention the team is growing. So we've just had someone start this past week, and we're still always looking for people who are as interested in containers as Brent is. So yeah, I came into DevRel in a weird, circuitous way. I came from OS development. So I was also involved with Docker pretty early. Though I was responsible for the doomed port of Docker to Solaris. But it was really fun getting to know Docker, and it was really crazy fast moving, fast paced back then. So we actually ported it like 3 times before it hit upstream. It was great. But yeah, I was involved with the OCI runtime project, and more recently I became a developer advocate. So I focus mostly on Kubernetes and all the container things, and always happy to talk about basically any way that people are using our stuff or just containers in general. I focus mostly on EKS as a product, but always happy to talk about anything. And yeah, so I'm happy to be here. I'm excited to see who's going to join us. We already have, I think, one person who's joined us, which is rad.
Yeah, I see Ian, you've joined, but I don't think you've connected your audio yet. So maybe, I don't know, I don't recall exactly what that process is, but definitely check that out and see if you can get your audio connected up. There's also a dial-in. If you wanted to dial in, you can follow the web link, and I think it'll describe, or it'll even call out to you if you type your phone number in. So hopefully it's easy to get connected. We'll see. But in the meantime, what do you guys want to talk about?
Well, so I think two things that are one thing. Justin mentioned, Disney Plus and that talk at reInvent, which I want to get the link for and share it in chat. It was a really good talk. And what one key component in that talk that I heard a lot of was how Disney Plus built their own platform to service, their development teams. So, kind of that self-service where they get, auto scaling, blue-green deployments, all these things just built in from the platform. And I know there was a lot of work, a lot of engineering labor that went into building that. And Brent, earlier you mentioned Proton. So, one thing I had tweeted about when after I saw the talk was, Disney Plus at the time didn't have Proton. Proton wasn't there yet. And they worked really hard to build out this platform. And, if you're someone new, you're a team that's new, you're coming in and you're thinking, should I be building a platform, for my team, like a self-service platform for my organization? How would you approach that, Brent? Like, how would you think about that as you're approaching it?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because we talk about Goodwin's Law internally, like every now and then there's a flurry of conversation around it, and then no one mentions it for a while. But we're used to thinking in terms of two pizza teams at AWS, where a team is responsible for a service and it's completely end to end. But that's not how everyone works. When we talk to some of our customers, we realize that those customers, they might have a good, healthy staff of developers, engineers, whatever, but not everyone is a cloud expert. And so those enterprise customers especially will often create a team of cloud experts, and they'll say, go solve this problem for me, build us a platform that we can use. Often the criteria are that it needs to be self-service, that it needs to allow our developers to just maybe click a few buttons and suddenly they can see their service running either in development in a development environment, or maybe all the way up into production. So Proton was kind of built to address that need, where you don't have a cloud expert on every dev team. You instead have probably located them all onto one team, and they're working to build a platform. So we went about it thinking in terms of, well, how do platform teams build platforms? They use infrastructure as code. They often build repeatable templates that they just want to be able to stamp out as many of the same things as possible, and then they need to be able to talk to their service teams and gather the inputs, gather some data, like what in our case, what container image do you need to run? What kind of scaling should it have? Where should it be running in Fargate or EC2 instances? These are all things that you have a conversation with the service team about, and then you can stamp them an environment and they can self-service provision. So Proton was built to address that need. And it's pretty cool. It's simple the way it works. It just uses Jinja for templating. And you can effectively today template a CloudFormation file that then gets used to build an environment on your behalf. The second thing, though, that I think is really cool about it is everyone that we talk to that has done this using other AWS services, what they discover is the day two ownership of whatever gets built is owned by that service team, not by the platform team. And that ends up causing problems because the service team isn't used to thinking about it's time to upgrade this. This thing hasn't, there are now like 2 or 3 or 4 additional versions of this, new versions of this pattern that make all kinds of improvements. But I don't want to take the time to actually understand what all these changes are, whether we need them, how they'll impact me. I just want to keep what I have. So it's often easier to just stay at version 1 of whatever that template is. Proton keeps the ownership of the platform with the platform team. So the platform team can decide, oh, look, we've iterated, to the next version, and there's all kinds of improvements that we know our service teams will benefit from. We don't need to ask them for new inputs or anything. We already have the right information, so we'll go ahead and apply these updates. So it's really cool that the platform team can sort of maintain that ownership and alleviate the service teams of that responsibility. So I think I'm pretty excited to see what comes of it.
And there's one thing I wanted to add to that, which was building, we talk guardrails or opinionated defaults. So every time I talk about something, in AWS, I always recommend if you're new, use an opinionated tool like Copilot or the CDK, something that has a lot of opinion built in, that's going to do things based off of good practices, so you don't shoot yourself in the foot, so to speak, right? Like you have kind of safety built in place. But with something like Proton, the platform team can build those best practices in. And one thing that stuck out to me in that Disney Plus talk, now, with the platform they built, was like auto scaling was built in off of defaults, right? There were like same defaults of auto scaling built in. And as your app grew, if you realize, okay, I don't need to scale off CPU or memory, there's something else. Okay, you can add that, to the platform. There's some customization you can add to get, more granular scaling based off of what you need. So I think it's that constant evolution, but at least you start, you go in with the mindset of building a kind of a best practice, one-click deploy, and then you grow from there.
So Duolingo, I was talking with someone from Duolingo, and it's been a while now, but they had a situation where they wanted to go and change some timeouts. They wanted to change like the health check timeout and the number of health checks before a service is marked as unhealthy, or number of health checks before it's marked, after being unhealthy, before it's marked healthy again. All these things affect how your traffic gets routed and how quickly you might recover from a problem. And so their platform team had built a bunch of Terraform modules, and those Terraform modules had been used and reused and consumed by all their service teams. Well, once they realized, hey, we can improve these timings, they iterate, and of course this is all very good stuff. They like shortened their timings pretty substantially, and it meant that they could recover from any kind of, recover from a failure instead of, a couple of minutes, and it was down to like 20 seconds or so. It's awesome. But to get it rolled out, they had to go and talk to all the different service teams and work with them and say, okay, pull the updated version of the module and then run Terraform apply. And, like had to kind of shepherd them through what needed to be done to get those new values available. And that's something that if they were, if Proton had been available to them and they were using it, they could just go and make the changes behind the scenes and push a button and have that go out. And I think that's really where we want to be. We want to be, where the people that are experts at the infrastructure can tweak and control the infrastructure. And then the people that are experts at the app can tweak and control and push and ship the app. And I'm excited to have that in the near future. Should we get to Ian's question here? He's excited about Fargate exec SSM stuff that looks like it's upcoming to be able to directly connect to a container. I've been waiting for a while for this. Is this weeks or months away?
You and me both, by the way. You and me both. I am so excited for this feature.
Well,
it is exciting. Yeah, and there's a lot of people that have wanted this for sure. Yeah,
I mean, should we let him in on it? Should we tell him how close it is, and then let's talk about it for sure?
It's coming soon. That's what we say. It's coming soon.
Coming soon.
So Massimo, I think just commented like a couple of weeks ago on that issue, and that's the thing with the roadmap is that we want to protect your consumption of something, and planning around it and the use of it and dependency on it. And, if we say, oh, it's a month away, you're going to plan on it. And we don't want to do that because, we ship things iteratively. We ship things as fast as we possibly can. So this is not the old world of, quarterly releases where we put DVDs in the mail to you or, but that said, as soon as it's done and tests are passing, it's going to ship. So that's why we say coming soon. As you might assume from Brent's introduction to that thought, it is very soon. We could say that without, it's coming. It's coming very soon. And it's very exciting. People are going to love it.
Yeah. And to let you in on a secret, if you haven't learned this about AWS, we don't like to commit to specific dates and timelines. So we'll leave it at generalities and we'll say very soon. Very soon.
And that's a benefit, right? I mean, I did mean to allude to that. I'm old enough to remember the old way, and it was painful for customers. We want a thing, and the thing is like, well, we'll build the thing. When are you going to ship it? 18 months. Maybe it only took 9 months to build it, but hey, we said 18 months, so that's when it's shipping. So we don't do that at AWS. We put things out there as fast as we can. So that's, there's a reason for it. But yeah, it can be a little frustrating.
I threw a couple of the links in the chat for YouTube and Twitch, just to give people like some like history tracking on here. I also, like, you look at the comments for the original, like, we want Docker exec, like I'm in there as well, like as a customer before I joined AWS, like, hey, can I have this thing? So totally, we're all on the same page. Like we all wanted this thing. And if you're watching like the SSM agent updates, because SSM agent is open source, and so you'll see the release notes on there, and you'll see like in release notes, like, oh, look, this looks like a feature that might tie to this other thing. So yeah, it's coming soon. I really like this second link I put in here on the design, because it actually gives a pretty good like ASCII diagram of like what happens when you exec, of like mounting files into place. And I like that sort of detail of, oh, cool, like now I understand how it's going to be used, and some of that, like, oh, I want to use it for these things. So and also shout out to my old team at Disney. We wrote SSM helpers, which was a way to use session manager to get on instances, and I know that team wants to extend it for containers as well once it's ready. And so we had a wrapper basically that would allow you to execute commands across a fleet of machines, or create sessions in a more friendly sort of UX to like auto prompt for what, based on tags or based on domains or accounts or whatever, or regions. So it allowed a lot of like more flexibility for the operator, and they want to extend that for sure to like say, hey, I want to get to a container. how do I get there?
Nice. So I see Ian's second question. What about Fargate on Graviton? That's not as soon. So we'll just leave it at that. But let's talk a little bit about, can we talk a little bit about just Graviton in general and how like cool it is? I don't know. Has anyone here tried it out and converted any of your code over to being ARM compatible?
I haven't, but what I have seen is just the buzz on the Twitters about it. And I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of customer success with Graviton in general, not specifically Fargate Graviton. Obviously that's a feature request on the roadmap, but was it Honeycomb that they had like a considerable savings and like a considerable performance improvement by migrating everything to Graviton. So I mean, there's a reason the hype is there.
Job of writing up their work and writing up their findings and sharing it with the world, and it was amazing to read through that. And I think that's absolutely everyone should be checking it out. It's sort of like, if you haven't looked at serverless, you should think about it. If you're not in containers, you should be looking at that. If you're not using Graviton, you should be exploring it, right? It's one of those things that definitely is, and it can be really painless, right? So I mean, taking a Rust app or C++, Go, some compiled language, it's fairly straightforward, but thinking most web services aren't even running that. I mean, you're running, Node or you're running Python. It's a pretty transparent port, right? I mean, it's not like you're looking at syscalls and they're different on a different architecture. I mean, this is really a pretty straightforward thing, at least to get a POC up so you can test things out. Almost, I mean, not guaranteed, but like 9 times out of 10, you're going to see a significant price performance increase. And it's really exciting to know that that's just there. And, sort of that's, again, one of the things that's great about cloud is, you don't need to be swapping out racks of compute and, calling your service provider and being like, yeah, come pick these up. I put them on the curb. Give me a credit for the next 14 months on my contract and wheel the ARM stuff in here. No, you can just kind of flip over, check out Graviton, do some builds, see what you see, and move. Especially with containers. Now we're looking at a lot of integrations beyond Fargate. So I think the one thing that's worth noting is that is also on the roadmap. It's also something we're looking at, and it just moved into researching on the roadmap, which we tend to be intentional with when we change the statuses of things. So the fact that it's in researching really means people are looking at it. Engineering is going to take a look at it, see what it's going to entail. But we have a lot of other ideas there too around, image builds and multi-image architecture for containers. So there's a lot of cool stuff to be done with Graviton.
I'm pretty excited to convert over eksworkshop.com and ecsworkshop.com to use Graviton as the environment that gets brought up. And I kind of charted out super high level what it's going to take. And it, from what I've been able to think about, it's going to take being able to run Docker on Cloud 9, which it appears for now will still have to be Intel based, but then being able to build an image that is multi-architecture, push it to ECR, which is doable, and then be able to launch that out on a Graviton data plane. So some of the instructions are going to have to be updated to be able to support that. So I think that's probably my biggest holdup. But what I'm excited about is the ability to then further bring down the cost of the infrastructure that you run when you take the workshop. It's a 20% savings on the instance cost. And then Honeycomb pointed out, they also saw 20% performance improvement, so they could run 20% fewer instances. So that's pretty impressive.
And I do want to point out one thing: like the code changes from x86 to ARM are simple. The dependencies you have in your infrastructure is where it gets a little more complex, where this isn't just a switch over. Like exactly Ian's point here is like, hey, when can I get Fargates with ARM? It's like, well, like we need to port some more things for that. If you're trying to use Kubernetes on ARM, you'll have mixed results because not all controllers are built for ARM. So you can't get things like, I don't think the autoscaler has an ARM build. There's various things that are like, oh, like I rely on this. Like maybe those aren't there yet. And the Honeycomb story is, to me, a really good example of ownership, where they're not running Kubernetes, they're not running ECS, they're running EC2 instances with Chef, and they have containers to package their software, but like they own that stack, and so they're able to, based on their needs, move as needed because Chef has had ARM forever, and Docker does support ARM in the Linux world, not on Mac ARM yet.
Yeah,
but
that's right.
but for Linux, I've been running Docker on a Raspberry Pi for I don't know how long, and so like in the Linux world, like ARM has been supported for a lot of these OS layer things. Docker supports it, but the Honeycomb story really says like, hey, people have been worried about lock-in for things. And it's like, hey, like maybe there is even at a different level of like, oh, I wanted Kubernetes, like, oh, now I need to switch to ARM. It's like, okay, you have to wait for those dependencies to catch up. And if you own the lower layers of the stack, you can move faster. There might be a cost there. And to Jesse's point, like Honeycomb has done a great job of sharing their experience. And it turns out when you run a observability company, you're good at observing your performance and sharing that data with everyone else, which is pretty obvious to me. But also like, okay, let's I can port one thing. I could say, hey, this is an Nginx app. I just run it somewhere. But if you rely on other things to run your production, you might be waiting for that ecosystem and the community and providers to kind of catch up with you.
Yeah, you have operational software, you have control plane components. There's so many things in a managed service. So it is worth mentioning, since we bumped up against it, that we're looking at that in EKS too, right? And it's a really good opportunity for us to actually to help contribute upstream some of that. So we have sort of this, goal to make this work. Well, it's just Kubernetes, right? So whatever we can do for EKS around that, just having multi-architecture builds, it's beneficial to the community. So
That would be cool.
It's a really good thing to pick up. There's a pressing question in the Twitch chat about Graviton being a Decepticon or an Autobot. That's a good question. I'm gonna go with Autobot, but it actually does sound like a Decepticon name, because like Autobots are the good guys, right? Like, but they have pretty cheesy names, Jazz. The Decepticons have the cooler names. That's a DevOps hill. That's a DevOps hill I'll die on.
Master Mendio disagrees with you. Definitely Decepticon, he says.
And again, feel free to join us, folks. This is we're doing this live on Chime. The link is in the chat there. I think actually I put on Twitch chat, so Brent will pop it up on the screen. But anyways, yes. Join us. Come chat. I see it looks like Tushar Mishra joined us, so feel free, Tushar, if you want to chime in and say hello. Welcome.
Hey. And you'll have to perfect.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thanks for doing this. First time on a live stream, I guess. I do some container-related stuff while working on my machine learning projects for my job in Amazon. And it's great to meet you guys. I'm not very adept with container and its terminologies, but I'm here to learn more.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for joining us. We keep saying this kind of thing internally, but I think it's probably worth saying externally. But we kind of think that containers are going to be the new compute primitive. And instead of thinking about EC2 instances, you're going to start thinking about which container are you going to run. Will it be, either a Fargate sized, appropriately sized container, or just whatever it is that you want to stuff in your container, and maybe we'll reach the point where we can auto size it for you. I think that, the future is bright. So I'm pretty excited to see what ends up happening.
Yeah. The thing that I'm looking more into right now is the differences in how you would debug a normal application running on a EC2 instance versus something running on Fargate. That's something that I've been having some problems with, and that's what I'm trying to learn from a lot of you guys' tutorials as well, and from this stream, getting some new terminologies from here as well.
Who wants to take that?
I mean, I think this is a multi-part. I love that question though. And so is this ECS? Did you say ECS and ECS Fargate?
Well, yeah, using Fargate.
Using Fargate, yeah. So, there was mention, of course, just earlier about, Fargate exec, which, down the road, that's going to be a great way to just give you access directly into a container to see what's going on. But if, you're like me and Jesse and Brent and Justin, where we all, I don't know, actually, I don't know if I've heard Justin say it, but I've had so many conversations with Jesse about this. But where we, look, you shouldn't be accessing your containers. At the end of the day, these are immutable. We shouldn't be doing any sort of changes on the containers live. But of course, break glass, when things go wrong, it's great to be able to exec in there. I think, logging is important. So ensuring your application is logging as you expect, and then checking, CloudWatch metrics with Fargate, these kind of out of the box, you get these available. Of course, there's going to be times. So usually here's my workflow with Fargate is I look for logs, I look at metrics, I try to see what's going on. CloudWatch Container Insights is also very helpful if you enable that, just to get some more enhanced metrics, such as network performance and so on. But if my Fargate container task is launched, but it's not starting, oftentimes that means, and I'm not seeing anything in logs, there's no metrics, nothing giving me any insight. Oftentimes this is when you have to look at, there's an issue with scheduling this container, which actually getting this container to start. So, oftentimes that's whether it's looking at the console, you can go into the console. It's very easy to just see, you find that task, you look at the output of the status of what happened. Usually you'll get some sort of exit code. Like my favorite is exit, was it 137?
Yeah.
Brent, where, the 137 run out of memory, but that's usually going to be your starting point. And if it's not something related to the container, but maybe it's your task execution role, your task role is not set properly. That's where you're going to be able to get those details outside of just your application logs and so on. But that's usually my workflow. I don't know, Brent, do you have any other, thoughts on how you'd troubleshoot that issues?
Well, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head insofar as there's a few different layers to think about. And one is, like you said, is it a problem with the scheduler, like the scheduler actually running the container? In which case there's one place to look. But then there's another where your container might come up, might even be running, and then you need to troubleshoot the application inside of the container. And that set of logs and workflow is, different. There are some specifics as well. Maybe, I don't know, Jesse, if you know much about this, but like, I know Java, you can attach a debugger. So like there are some language specific things that you can go through. You can exec into containers that are running on EC2 instances today. So if you have tools that are built into the container, then those tools can be used to help troubleshoot. I think there's a pattern in the Kubernetes space where, Justin, what's the new feature about being able to attach or add?
Yeah, ephemeral containers for debugging.
Yeah.
Where it mounts a sidecar container on the fly with your tools installed. So that's moving up to beta in release 121. But yeah, and there is a kube control debug plugin for Kubernetes for kube control that doesn't require ephemeral containers. So like you could even try that. But in ECS Fargate, like I'm much more a pragmatist than like an idealist when it comes to this stuff. Like I in most cases just want a shell. Like give me the feedback loops for, let me go to the console or go to an API or go somewhere else is going to be too long for me to actually like remember what I'm looking for or even add print statements or whatever. So in a lot of cases, like if I had a Fargate task, I also would run it in EC2. So I could exec into it from the EC2 layer. So I could say, okay, let me add this to the pool because there's no reason you can't mix them in an ECS cluster. Like I could have the same application sort of like same endpoints spread across different executions. So I could say, okay, I need to load balance between some of the stuff. Let me get to the EC2 one, see what's going on. I mean, Brett mentioned the language specific debuggers. Those usually slow things down, and it, for me at least, have caused like other problems where I'm like, oh, this is weird now. I'm like, oh yeah, because I have this live attached debugger for it, or I need other like container the kernel abilities. So it's like I need, you know, cap sysadmin for strace or something. So I need something else that like the language requires me to run that container specifically. And it's different once you change it. You can't just like say, oh, this is the same. It's like, no, config's different. I have different flags on. So I try to at some level, I'll balance those with ECS exec. It's going to reduce some of that, but I can't tell you how many times like I would just say like, I just need a shell to like try 3 things, and then I could know where to look after that. And that's fine. Like, I just need to get to that point.
Yeah. And Adam, I see you posted in chat. Sorry, Jesse. The cloud debugging beta for debugging your applications running with using JetBrains as your IDE. So it's very specific to a very specific use case, but if you happen to match it, then that's something that you could start to look into. What were you going to say, Jesse?
I was just going to say, like, yeah, the patterns are sort of age old. Like, you know, bringing ECS exec for Fargate in is really to enable that workflow, right? Because that's, at the end of the day, you know, you have 2 phases where you're in development and pretty much all bets are off. Like, anybody saying, oh, you shouldn't SSH into your container, it's like, well, it's under development. Like, let me do whatever works, right? And that's a perfect case where even if you have a sidecar, like, how do you get to it? It's on Fargate, right? So, you know, for me, I often will build, you know, an application, a service as just a daemon running on a bare node, right? And just say, well, is it working, right? Is the software working? And then you containerize it, and then you bring it into orchestration. And sort of every step along the way, you need to make sure things are right. You know, like as Adam pointed to, like you could have, you know, killer could come in at any point, right? But you also might have, you know, just IAM issues where you're like, oh, it's failing because it doesn't have permission to do whatever I'm telling it to do because I've taken it from, you know, a little piece of software running on my laptop or in a container to an orchestrated system in the cloud, right?
I'm going to challenge you here.
It's important.
I could get that in logs, though.
That's what I was going to say. Is I think it's important to then realize there is a transition to when you're running, when you're deployed, and you're orchestrated, and you really need your, you know, at least your golden signals, right? You need to be thinking about, you know, I like to say, so like you have metrics, traces, and logs, and everybody knows that. But really how they work together is the important part, right? So metrics is going to show you have a problem through outliers over time. Traces are going to show you an entire instance of traversal, right? You could have 15 microservices deep, right? How do you do that when they're ephemeral and half of the instances are gone? You have traces. And then your logs are going to be like basically the breadcrumbs you left yourself, your future self, bailing yourself out of problems, right? To say, oh, like, I think this downstream service is probably buggy and I'm going to retry it. And then I'm going to tell you it failed after 4 times, right? So you have all of that put together. That's once the thing's up and running and built. It is completely fine to be execing in or SSHing in and using debug containers. And honestly, the Kubernetes ephemeral container feature is really just, you know, a sort of, it's not syntactic sugar, it's more than that, but it really is sugar around a pattern that we've been using for years. So I think it's good to just keep the 2, you know, and as far as, you know, source level debuggers, runtime specific debuggers, use them if you need them. You know, I mean, that's the thing. Like if it's confusing your stuff and it's in the way, you probably didn't need it, because anytime I've had to actually attach a debugger, I needed it. You know, whether it's PDB or GDB or, you know, whatever is going on, magic.
And
anyway, those are my thoughts.
your example of, just kind of where this sits from a historic perspective is super handy because it can still call out the fact that containers were just at the beginning of them. Like it's super early days still in the grand scheme of things, and we're like Justin said, ephemeral containers beta for 121. I mean, like, we're only now getting around to solving this kind of problem in a systematic way. So it's
It's good to keep in mind like that adoption and then that newness is all informed by the past, right? So it's not like when you had 5,000 blade servers mounted all running the OS, on metal, that you were like logging into all of them and SSHing to them and checking on their logs. You weren't doing that, right? We used golden signals then too. And so I think the idea is just to sort of keep that in mind from the past. Because it really is, it's nothing new, but this stack is totally new, and how we're using it is totally new.
Yeah.
And I think there's some really cool sysdig talks around just the ephemeral nature of containers and what that means. Like, if you've been compromised, like, how do you know? What do you log into to check, right? And so it's so important to think in the future and to think sort of leaving, the footprint of your ephemeral resources.
We got
Sorry,
about
Justin.
20 minutes left, and there's a few more questions. I just wanted to see if we can.
I was about to touch on Jamie's question. Is that one that you wanted to hit up? Because I think it's actually super interesting. I'm starting with ECS Fargate, and I've seen that currently it does not support Docker and Docker because it requires running that in privileged mode. Is there a solution in the Fargate roadmap, or should I look for other alternatives? And it made me immediately think to some of the talks that I've seen around building containers without using the Docker daemon. And I'm wondering, is that a possibility? Is that something that we should, maybe explore? How could we run a process that builds a container inside a container? Is that even a possible thing without using Docker?
I don't have that answer, but what I do have is a solution to the problem.
Okay.
Sorry, but right now, so we have capacity providers. So I would, at this time, you have to look for alternatives, right? Like that's just, it's not supported right now in Fargate. But with capacity providers, with ECS, you can essentially have, 0 instances running when there's no need to run them. And then when you launch a task that needs to run Docker and Docker, with capacity providers, it'll launch EC2 capacity, which gives you that privileged mode to run your Docker and Docker container, do what you need to do the needful. And then when that task is done, capacity providers will recognize there's no more containers running on that server, kills it off. So
that's more elegant than the way I was going. Thank you.
Your approach is very technical and very cool, by the way. And I'm sure Jesse and Justin have amazing answers for that. But I would just say, I think capacity providers solves that problem. And I think of it, when I think of Docker and Docker, I just think of like CI/CD. I think of like building container images. And I think of like Jenkins. I have a lot of experience working with Jenkins. And one thing though was that is actually, yeah, I grew up going by Jenkins actually, and then evolved. But it's the example of, I may use Fargate to run the leader node because I don't need privileged. But if I need to build Docker images, obviously I need Docker and Docker. So to use like dynamic, you can use ECS as your to run those containers, and with capacity providers behind the scenes, come up, build, go away when your build is done. Pay for what you use.
Yeah, the pay for what you use part is what I was just thinking of. ECS control plane is free, so it could all just be sitting there costing you nothing until it's time to use it. At which time, like you said, an instance spins up and does the needful, and then it goes away again, and you're back to.
Yeah, I like that solution.
Yeah,
I like that solution because I typically, and Justin and I have talked about this, I completely respect the fact that a lot of people build their container artifacts in their orchestration resources. I'm not a huge fan of it. I like separation of concerns to the point of being sort of ridiculous about it, right? Like, I didn't provision a cluster to build images. I don't build images in the cluster. However, I know people do it. So I really, actually really like this pattern. Imagine it would be completely possible to do in Kubernetes just as easily. We're basically spinning up specific resources for the build and then spinning them back down.
100%.
Yeah, it's interesting.
We should figure out how to do that and do a show about it.
Let's do it. I'm in.
I like
Yeah,
it.
I mean,
Adam just figured out how to do it.
Did we just reinvent code build?
I think we did.
Oh, okay.
It's a good
yeah,
point.
I mean, there are services that like Code Build that would do some of this for you as well. And even the image builder for AMI supports containers now too. So it's like you can send some other two different services. As far as like if you really want to do it in Fargate, I mean, there are other build tools that don't require root daemons running. There's IMG, there's build control, there's a bunch of these tools that have been popping up that you could also, that still use Docker files as well. So it's like you don't have to like, I mean, Adam's solution would work out of the box. You have to, on the infrastructure side, you solve that problem, but you can do that at the tooling side as well. So there's a handful of tools out there now that are doing it. I know with Docker deprecation and Kubernetes, a lot of other people are also looking at this, not just people on Fargate, but there's plenty of options out there now.
That's what I was originally thinking about, but yeah, like I think it could be interesting to explore, how to build images without the Docker daemon as a show idea, but just more broadly, how do you then scale it? How do you put it in your CI/CD? And yeah, keeping that Docker file format as the sort of initial description of how an image should be built, I think would be super nice. But then also capacity providers, and just scaling your infrastructure and solving it completely outside of the workflow, I think would be really cool too.
But I do want to say though, if this is some sort of like CI for CI code build, like you can trigger builds off of Git commits, ECR, like there's so much you can do. I would probably approach that using code build first if I could. I would go there first. That was a great point. I can't believe I forgot that.
Well, that's what I was thinking. If we did a show on the capacity providers, and I still think we should. I wonder how, once we get to the end of it, how much would it look like code build? We should then just like make sure to have that comparison, because there's what we built, and then the parts of it that we'll have to own and manage, and then there's code build, and that's pretty easy.
And look, sometimes we approach these, when we're doing this live, I'll oftentimes just take a question at surface level. I didn't ask like questions, qualifying questions to really understand the use case. But yeah, either way, there's a million ways you can solve it. I would say if this is like a use case you have more questions on, reach out to us on Twitter. Yeah. I think it was Jamie SC87. Feel free to reach out to us. Let us know what you're trying to do. Glad to talk through it as well.
Yeah. Like if you're talking about drone CI and that's your CI of preference, then, that's certainly a good reason to not use code build. So we should then try and figure out how we would build it. It'd be interesting.
Yeah. Right. I mean, you can have, GitLab runners, GitHub actions. There's a lot of different ways that like people have a tool that solves all of their problems, and then they want to execute from there. So if you're tying, GitLab with Fargate, it's like, okay, well, let's maybe tie, GitLab with, capacity provider.
Yeah. That would be really cool.
So many ideas.
I know, right?
We had it's a bit shifting gears a little bit, but there was kind of a cool question over in YouTube chat about ECS deployments. And I know, Adam, you've done some work here, and I know that we could maybe speak to this a little bit. As usually, Claire Liguri has killed it with her talk on continuous delivery at the last reInvent. Meanwhile, I still deploy using blue-green like an animal.
That's
to
so
reach
funny
that
to
next
me.
level on ECS. Great question.
That is awesome. First of all, though, I'd love to hear what you're doing. And no, let me go back. first of all, Claire Ligori is amazing, and we really need to get her on this show just to talk about all the amazing things she does with CI/CD. Like she's like her talks are amazing. So I would love to talk to you though, Grantable, and hear about what you're doing and what you're trying to do, because we have a lot of really cool things coming down the pipeline when it comes to more progressive deployments in ECS this year. So I'd love to hear the use cases, but I don't think blue-green is a bad thing at all. I mean, blue-green's good, right. And it really just depends on the context.
Definitely not, you're definitely not a heathen at the edge of the wood doing blue-green.
Heck no.
You're advanced.
What about
there's
breakers?
people out there still doing RSH and untarring tarballs on their root file systems as deployment. So, doing great. I do think it's interesting to sort of think about the differences though, like in what people even mean. Like often people say blue-green and they really mean rolling. So a rolling deployment where you go out and maybe every 20% of your system gets turned over, you wait for it to be healthy, you do another 20%. So that's a rolling deployment, where blue-green is like really two full identical environments and you have a flip-flop, right? So you're running your blue environment as prod, over in green, you set up staging, you do your tests, you say, cool, flip, right? So there's so many permutations even of that before you get to canaries, where you have progressive rollout while doing automated health monitoring and automatic rollback. So there's so many different places to go. And
yes, and with ECS, by the way, this is built in with the code deploy integration. So there is a blue-green, red-black where you just flip the switch, right? 100%. But there's also canary. There's a linear deploy, so you can deploy. Like this is what I would say is like kind of that next level. Is you can have a canary deployment, and as long as your health checks are really good and your monitoring's really solid, you can have that canary, and then if the canary fails, it automatically rolls back and you don't have to worry about affecting everything. But also there's the linear deploy option where you can just slowly roll out, which is, I would say for these larger use cases where you have a lot of services, maybe a linear deploy makes a lot of sense, right? You want to slowly roll it out into the fleet, check error rates every couple minutes, make sure they're low, below your threshold, and then have it continue out. So check out the code deploy integration, because there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with that. And please do reach out to me on Twitter. I'd love to hear what you're doing, because we have some really cool stuff coming down this year. So hopefully.
Just to jump in there a little bit too, like everyone else said, blue-green is great. Like keep doing it if it solves your problem. That was the primary way that we deployed things for Disney Plus. Like that was, like Zach mentions it in the talk of like the deployment tool like had only blue-green. Everyone did blue-green, and it was great up until you got to like certain scales. When if you have 1,000 tasks inside of a service, spinning up another 1,000 is kind of expensive, and you have to wait a little while for that to kind of get healthy. And that's where Canary and these linear deployments sort of made it easier. You can do Canary a couple different ways. Service mesh or app mesh is one of those ways that allow that. Code build's another way to do that. Actually, I think someone just mentioned, we did it with target groups. You can have an ALB with a target group, and you can just, target groups can have percentages of traffic. And we just, let's just change that as we go, get the next 25% healthy, and then add another 25% or 10%. And we add knobs for people to say like, I want to have a long time canary that always sends 10% over here, or I want it to, during a rolling deployment. So there's a few different ways you can solve this at that layers of the stack, whether that's at network, at the load balancer, or at the build pipeline. So figure out where it is that is best for you to put that in place if you really want canary, but it doesn't have to be the default. Like blue-green is fine, especially at smaller scales. If you're rolling out 50 to 100 tasks, like it's not that big of a deal to like stand up another 50, wait for it to be healthy, and then just kill off the old ones. And it's a lot safer for rollbacks, right? You leave those 50 running, and you say, actually, we thought we were healthy, but we need to switch back. And if it's still there, it's a quick switch. If you're doing canary, you have to go through and find all the old instances and make sure you drain them properly and get back to scale. So there's some benefits there at blue-green as well.
Yeah, totally.
And
I see
you mentioned circuit breakers,
joined us. Well, but I wanted to see before we ran out of time. I see E Prasad join the chat. I just wanted to check in and find out: is there a topic or a question that they wanted to chat about?
could be muted too.
Yeah, I don't know. Since it's a phone icon, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's the phone.
So, Prasad,
so
if you
in
want
the
to join
chat-
us by voice or by video, you're welcome to.
Hi, Brett. So I just posted the question. So I just missed that Graviton Fargate. So is that coming soon or?
We're looking at it. We started researching it to figure out like how best we could implement it at scale for our customers. So I think you can expect it, eventually. But right now, I wouldn't expect that it would be here, soon by anyone's definition.
Okay,
Yeah, it's on the roadmap though.
Okay, I have another one. So we are trying to explore the twist lock component on this Fargate and the managed node. I think twistlock was not available for Fargate, but eventually they launched the Defender thing. We're trying it out, but I just have a question. So is it container inside a container? Is this a better way to do that, or you guys recommend?
Well, I think what you're talking about might be in the Kubernetes world, it's called a sidecar. I guess in the ECS world, we refer to it as sidecars. But rather than it being a container inside a container, just know that on ECS, you actually put containers inside of a task. And that task can have up to 10 containers. So you might have your main application container, but then alongside that, you might have a twist lock agent, a logging agent, some kind of like metric shipping agent. There's just any number of things that you might include along with your application container, and those can all be listed as part of your task definition.
Okay, thank you so much.
Absolutely. So, Adam, what were you going to talk about?
Well, I guess as we wrap up, you had mentioned circuit breakers. Just to go back to the deployment conversation, one, Jesse made a really great point. Just because there's really great, cool, fancy ways to deploy doesn't mean you need to use them. The rolling deployment mechanism in ECS is very straightforward, and it does the job. And frankly, it does a pretty darn good job. But you had mentioned circuit breakers. So if you haven't yet and you're using ECS, take a look at deployment circuit breakers. We just announced the functionality I believe in November, and I think it's GA now. It's GA. But this is essentially a way to have control, automated, basically monitoring over your task deployments, your service deployments. If they fail beyond a certain threshold, we will automatically roll it back to the previous deployment for you. So this solves some problems that ECS users were experiencing when they were deploying. And if it was through CloudFormation, it would just kind of hang for a couple hours if your task just kept failing. Whereas now this should address a good chunk of use cases there.
Yeah.
So check that out.
And it's probably worth saying that circuit breakers, if you're doing standard rolling deployments already, circuit breakers are almost certainly something you can implement and only improve your situation. Like there's almost, I can't think of a downside to it. So you should definitely check that out. So I think we're out of time. This is our very first edition of Containers from the Couch. Have a seat. So hopefully you enjoyed it, and we're gonna go back and we're gonna reevaluate how things went and discuss. But we hope to do this on a regular basis. So tweet at us. Let us know what you think. Let us know if you liked it, and hopefully think about joining next time. Bring your questions, bring your problems, and we'll do our best to address them. But until then, everyone have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.